So the Paw of Opala quest begins in South Quenos, and you talk to two men getting drunk at a bar in South Quenos at the Fish's Ale by the name of Mick Coder and Kleb Torn. You ask them about the Paw of Opala, and after buying Mick Coder 2 brandies, he tells you about a ranger that can give you the information regarding the Paw of Opala. Ken O'Neill is the ranger. You can find him in West Corona. He wants some jewels, and they're pretty easy to acquire, with the exception, you can buy them at merchants, but you got to get the moonstone, and the Black Burrow Stout via quest, little side quest, whatever. But not gonna get into that. Once you give him everything, he basically tells you about a descendant of Gynok Moltor by the name of Vin Moltor. But Vin Moltor is living in poverty. Let's take a look at if we can get a picture of him really quickly. He's this guy. This is the model for the destitute humans in the human cities of Quenos and Freeport. And he essentially wants some alcohol and a rat ear pie. And if you give him the alcohol and the rat ear pie, Vin Moltor will give you the Paw of Opala. Unfortunately, he doesn't have the rings. So you have to get the rings for the paw separately, because he says his father sold him whatever. But he does give you a hint that his father traveled somewhere in Otis, etc. And you can camp several mobs and get the rings, or you can do a little side quest for Malixis, a merchant in Kara Isle. You can do the shiny ring quest, and she'll give you a couple of the rings for it. And once the paw itself is a combined, is a container, and you combine the rings inside of the paw, and then you get the Paw of Opala, which is a pretty decent classic item. Actually, one of the best classic secondaries or primaries you can have as a caster. It gives you 9 agility, 5 stamina, but most importantly, that 9 wisdom, right, for your casting abilities. It's cleric, druid, shaman usable. It also gives you 9 AC. So the very great item, very popular quest and classic. And now you know the lore related to Gynok Moltor cutting off Opala's paw, causing the war between Quenos and the Black Burrow Knolls, and resulting in his exile. And we find out where he winds up, which is at the chapter house. And then he causes, where are we at? Did I scroll? I scrolled way too far down. Where are we at? Oh, no, I didn't. I actually scrolled into a different thing here. What did I want to read here? I don't even know. Okay, that's what I wanted to read, but we're actually about to get into that. So let's get back to where we left off at. The clouds spread out from the chapter house to destroy small villages and whole caravans, and even to raise a horde of undead at an old battlefield around a tower in the Eastern Commonlands. So it says, for more information on the effects of the evil at the Tower of Death, see Realms of Norath, Freeport. Now, the Tower of Death, we see that in game in West Commonlands. There's a tower surrounded by undead. That undead is caused by Gynok Moltor summoning whatever force, evil malignant force that he summoned, that traveled out of Befallen into West Commonlands. And we're going to read about that in the Realms of Norath, Freeport, which is another of the RPG books. We're going to read about the Tower of Death. The Tower of Death was originally Fist Defiant, a Death Fist stronghold close enough to Freeport for Orc armies to march on the city. All right, so that was originally a stronghold or outpost for the Death Fist Orcs, which are the Orcs known to inhabit the Commonlands. You see them, Orc Highway, Oasis of Mars, etc., the Green Orcs. Continuing. It was from the... Let me actually zoom in a little bit. This looks like it's kind of far. Hopefully you guys can read along. It was from Fist Defiant that the Orcs, aided by human mercenaries and Dark Elf spellcasters, made their most concerted efforts to destroy the city. When the Order of Mars Fist besieged the tower, none of Fist Defiant's defenders would surrender, leading to a horrible slaughter so great that the scent of death was carried miles away. Rather than use the bloody tower as their own base of operations, the Paladins set torch to it, buried the dead, and forgot it. So there we have it right there. The Order of Mars Fist were the ones who created the tower in the decrepit state, or by burning it down, they made the tower appear in a decrepit state. And then we're going to see what happens later on to this former stronghold of the Death Fist Oryx, Fort Defiant. All right, so the original name Fort Defiant, and then it becomes later known as the Tower of Death. We're going to see why. The tower sat empty for years until a fool named Gynok Moltor released an unspeakable darkness within the stronghold of the Order of Mars Fist. All right, we just read about that. This darkness was drawn immediately to the tower as a site of great bloodshed and suffering. All right, so that great bloodshed and suffering is described in a paragraph prior when the Order of Mars Fist slaughtered all of the orcs and torched the place. It entered the tower and the graves around it, twisting and perverting the corpses within. The tower was repaired from the bodies of the fallen, turning into a massive structure of skull. I'm not familiar with this term, forgive me. Desiccated? Okay, maybe that's desiccated. Desiccated flesh and endless rows of bones. Every grave was opened, and an army of zombies and skeletons took guard around the tower. Those wanderers and residents nearby were poisoned and died, only to rise again as ghouls. Clearly, the darkness had plans for this army, but it miscalculated. The curse used all its strength to create the Tower of Death and was forced back to its point of origin, the bunker now known as Befallen, when the morning light came. It had sat in Befallen ever since, unable to escape, but still able to lure those who might be able to give it the power to spread once more. Now the Tower of Death is ruled by Ulin Nildare, female ghoul magi, a dark elf necromancer who was slain in the siege by the Order of Mars Fist and resurrected to undeath by the dark power in Befallen. So, dark elf ghoul necromancer. Ulin rules over an assortment of skeletons, ghouls, and zombies. See ghouls and zombies template. Well, I'm not going to continue. Actually, no, there's actually some important stuff here. So let me continue reading. Continue rule over skeletons, ghouls, and zombies that stand watch over her gruesome tower. So far, Ulin seems content to use the tower to research necromancy, but has received envoys such as Dark Elf Queen Christanios Thex. Right? To Christanios Thex, that is the former queen of the Eldar, who was married to King Nathox Thex, who was the former king of the Eldar. And also the first two Dark Elves made by Inaruk. And so that's very important to note, that she's the queen of the Dark Elves. Favored messenger, Kidian Gix. All right, so she's not saying that she received the envoy of the queen herself, but she received Kidian Gix, who's a Dark Elf, Shadow Knight. Those of us who made neutral or good races / classes or followed these good deities or neutral deities, as you're traveling through West Commonlands, if you came across this guy, he was much higher level than the mobs of the surrounding area, and he would just harm touch you. Goodbye, you're dead. He was one of my most frustrating nemesis, that when I was able to kill him at a higher level, I took every opportunity to do so. But the other envoy that Ulin entertained is a dark offerer from Castle Mistmore. So we already, I'm so hyped to do a video on Mayong Mistmore, but it's so much research to conduct. But you can see here that Mistmore is doing his subterfuge and, espionage and sending his agents all around Norath. And here's another example of him on Antonica. Should Ulin mobilize the forces of her tower, Fairfield might suddenly have a dangerous new enemy. Now, Fairfield, again, this is tabletop RPG stuff, so some of this may not be applicable. But like I said, for the most part, the majority of this I consider lore. As we see and are seeing more and more characters like Cristanios Thex, like Kitty and Gix. And we're going to see other notable characters in EverQuest that are mentioned, but, regions and whatnot. Apollo. We're seeing canon people who know it. We know they exist in the EverQuest universe. All right. So where do we leave off at? All right. Moving on. But the power of the malignancy was not limitless, and killing and perverting so many holy men and women drained much of its foul power. When dawn broke on the second day, the dark force was drawn back to the bunker where Moltor's corpse lay, and then bound within. Again, so we were reading that in the Realms of Norath Freeport, the Tower of Death. Is that what it's called? Yeah, Tower of Death. Double checking. Yep. So the former stronghold for the Death Visorix. So and we read that its power had to withdraw by daylight when dawn broke. Though its evil had spread for miles on its first night of existence, the evil could no longer break free of the bunker, but was limited to toying with those within willing to enter. So we also read that in that excerpt from the Realms of Norath Freeport, that it could no longer, that was a one-time thing. It spread out that one time, caused whatever destruction miles wide, and then it was drawn back. And my theory is probably that it had to have a host, and its host could only be in the center or the nucleus or the epicenter of the forces that are emanating within the host. It can only spread so far. And then it also states how so much of that force's power was drained going after those that are holy, because they're protected and you're going to have to use a great deal of magic to overcome them. But let's continue. The Order of Mars Fist never recovered from the loss of their main stronghold, which was Befallen. Although the Knights of Truth and Priests of Mar rose up to take their place. All right, so that's you have the Temple of Mar, you have the Temple of Truth, or I believe that's the name, or something close to that. But there are two separate paladin / cleric guilds in North Freeport. And those two come out of the one, Order of Mars Fist. Okay? So continuing on. For decades, none entered the former chapter house, which became known as Befallen. So quick was the destruction of the Order's base, and so complete was its transformation to a place of evil, that many visitors to the Commonlands assumed Befallen was a different location entirely. Gainak Moltor ruled over Befallen as a petty warlord, luring the occasional adventurer in his lair and making deals with the necromancers wishing to study Befallen's power. Moltor's power was relatively weak in terms of the great powers of Antonica, but with no Order of Mars Fist to raise an army against him, he endured as a force to be reckoned with in the Commonlands, despite being unable to leave Befallen himself. All right, so Gainak Moltor, he's not the most powerful entity around, but his main threat has been eliminated, and within Befallen itself, he's pretty secure. All right. So next section is talking about Commander Elrod. Now, those of us, I used to say Skeleton Lord, like I had some type of dyslexia when I would go into Befallen to fight on the first level. You'd be a yellow con or whatever. I'm a cleric like level 9 or something like that, and ward undead him down, as us clerics would do. But this is the individual, Skeleton Elrod. We're about to learn about his story when he was Commander Elrod. Many high elves entered Befallen, searching for the objects the order had placed within for safekeeping, the Thex Mallet. All right, so now the high elves are looking for this Thex Mallet that the paladins came across. All right, we're going to find out why these paladins had it in possession, why it was likely for them to find it over the high elves, and all that. If you even managed to find this object, yet they were each trapped by the evil of Befallen and kept from carrying the artifact back to Fadeware. Okay? So Commander Elrod, and the reason why he's there in a skeleton and no longer among the living, because we know how elves can live for centuries, right? The reason why he's no longer among the living is because of this curse in Befallen. All right, so now we know what happened to Skeleton Elrod and why he's a skeleton. Word of these expeditions eventually reached the Dark Elves of Neriak, who conclude that if an elven artifact resided within Befallen, the place must be the remnants of the elven empire that stood where the Desert of Ro is now found. All right, so boom. First, let me just say this. The Dark Elves have some of the best spies in all of Norath. And so they learned that these high elves are going on these expeditions out into the Commonlands looking for this Thex Mallet. And that alerted the Dark Elves to it. But another thing that was just mentioned that's very important is that the place must be the remnants of the Elven Empire that stood where the Desert of Ro is now found. So that Elven Empire is the Eldar Empire. All right, when the elves ruled Antonica, when it was once known as Tuneria. All right, that was the name of the continent prior to it being named after Antonia's Bale. Okay, so originally it was Tuneria, and the elves' capital is where the Desert of Ro is located. That was where the elf capital was. It was a majestical city known as Takish His. Okay, so that's why these human paladins were able to find this ancient artifact of these elves, this Thex Mallet. The reason why they were able to find it is because the Desert of Ro is located near Freeport, where the Order of Mars Fist were headquartered and had control. So they were expanding out, and on these expeditions, expanding out and taking over territory, they found artifacts, presumably, of the Eldar elves. And one of these artifacts was the Thex Mallet. A force of Dark Elves commanded by the Shadow Knight Lord Elrod traveled to Befallen to claim it and the Thex Mallet for the greater glory of Neriak. So let me just be clear. Commander Elrod, the skeleton, is an elf, but he's not a high elf. He's a dark elf. And he learned about the Thex Mallet from the high elves by from presumably spies from Neriak alerted them to the high elves expedition, and they decided they were going to claim the Thex Mallet for the glory of Neriak. A force of Dark Elves commanded by the Shadow Knight Lord Elrod traveled to Befallen to claim it in the Thex Mallet for the greater glory of Neriak. All right, so this is another character we see in game, but we see him as Skeleton Elrod, right? Lord Elrod and his brace of necromancers assaulted Befallen directly, decimating the undead of Gynok Moltor. Moltor managed to hold only the western wing on the second level, granting Elrod dominion over the rest of the dungeon. Elrod found the Thex Mallet and claimed it for himself. Impressed by the power of the Dark Elf commander, the evil force of Befallen threw aside its weak vessel, Moltor, and set its hooks in this new Shadow Knight. Elrod found he could now command the undead of Befallen and made preparations to return to Neriak at the head of a conquering army. To Elrod's surprise, however, he was unable to leave the dungeon without suffering great pain. He too had fallen prey to the curse of Befallen. All right, so the temptation of power is what made Lord Elrod kind of accept this evil force and the power that it was offering. But he did not know that it came with a caveat that he would never be able to leave. So he has this army now that would probably make him a very high-ranking individual within Neriak, and he would be a force to reckon with among the Dark Elves and other races of Norath, and it could have tipped the tides in favor of the Dark Elves to conquering, and that's probably why he did it. But unfortunately for him, this cost him his life. All right, so now a struggle for power ensues, right? Tales of Befallen's power spread far beyond the Commonlands, eventually reaching the Inithul Swamp. There, it attracted the attention of Redak Brokenskull, a troll shadow knight of great power. Brokenskull wished to unite the troll clans of Norath under his control and then lead them in conquest against the rest of the world. Though a mighty warrior and a fair leader for a troll, Brokenskull lacked the raw power to bring his splintered and insular his people together. In the tales of Befallen's undead masses, the troll saw an opportunity to gain the forces he required. All right, so Redak Brokenskull, he's trying to unite the various different clans of trolls under one umbrella, which would make the trolls very powerful. And he saw Befallen as an opportunity to amass the forces that he needed. Brokenskull arrived to find Lord Elrod raging against Befallen itself, with only a tenuous grip on command of the dungeon. Gainak Moltor fought him at every turn, stealing the Thex mallet and hiding it in pieces throughout the stronghold. The troll offered his service to first Elrod and then Moltor, playing the two undead against one another. When both were weakened and disadvantaged, both by their fighting and his maneuvering, Brokenskull betrayed them both, stealing Moltor's sword and using it to destroy every living creature loyal to either Moltor or Elrod. When both undead turned on him in fury at his betrayal, he proved unable to destroy them both and was forced to withdraw to an abandoned corner of Befallen to lick his wounds. All right, so Redak Brokenskull was basically trying to do what everybody else before him was trying to do, was trying to get power. And he used manipulation to manipulate both sides, Gainak and Elrod, to gain an advantage and to steal the power from under both of them. But they combined their powers together and defeated him, and then he had to fall back to a section of Befallen. But the evil that inhabited Befallen knew a conqueror when it saw one and granted Brokenskull its dark authority. He was made the new Lord of Befallen, able to send its legions in nighttime raids against nearby villages and camps. But when the troll attempted to march his new forces to Inithul Swamp, he discovered himself unable to leave the dungeon. Another dark villain had been caught by Befallen's darker curse. All right, so Gainak Moltor, Lord Elrod, and now Redak Brokenskull all have been bamboozled by the temptations of power and have fallen victim and prey to this curse. But interesting to note, Redak Brokenskull was able to send forces out, which is something that we see was difficult to do for Gainak Moltor. But maybe he's a stronger host. All right, so the Burning Dead is a faction that we're... Oh, by the way, we see Redak Brokenskull, right? He's the troll Shadow Knight on the second floor. So that's two characters. We do see Gainak Moltor in game as well, but we have to spawn him. So that's yet another character that we see in game. And you'll see a lot of these events tying together. Lore is consistent between the game quests and the whole world setup, and that's why I consider this basically canon. The Burning Dead. Matters in Befallen remain unchanged for decades, with Redak Brokenskull unquestioned ruler of the place of evil, but unable to send his forces further afield than one night's march. A decade ago, new forces came to Befallen, offering to aid Brokenskull in overcoming this limitation. Members of the Burning Dead. The forbidding Gnomish Guild of Necromancers came to Befallen to offer a deal. So this is the name of the Gnome Guild in Akanon. And they came here to offer Redak Broken Skull the ability to take his power outside of Befallen. And so let's read what he decides. Led by Menenzia the Thaumaturge, the gnomes promised Broken Skull they would serve him and seek a way to free him of Befallen's grip in return for being allowed to live in Befallen and study his dark magics. Frustrated with the limited scope of his efforts thus far, Broken Skull agreed. Secretly, of course, Menenzia had no intention of freeing Redak Broken Skull, though she certainly spent a great deal of time and effort researching the limits and range of the evil power's domain. In truth, Menenzia planned to use the power of Befallen for her own fell purposes. So this is like a broken record at this point, right? Even when they offer their assistance, they're really sneakishly offering it, right? And it's just what evil people do, right? They're gonna do things that are gonna involve betrayal and, you know, attempts to take power from others. All right. So let's learn what her purposes are. She was a disciple of the teachings of a powerful Gnomish necromancer who lived centuries before, the great Marnarch Jarl. And Marnarch Jarl is a very important figure in lore, even though his time we're gonna see predates the EverQuest period, or the time period that we as players get to experience, unless we're talking about EverQuest Online Adventures, which we're not, for the purposes of this. But there's a dagger of Marnarch. I'm not sure how you pronounce it. I'm gonna go with Marnarch. There's a dagger of Marnarch which drops in Befallen. So that was his dagger. But we're gonna read more about that. Once a mighty force in Tunaria, Jarl had fought against the elves of Takish His. All right, so we know that's Desert Row. And come close to exerting dominion over half the continent before he and the burning dead were stopped by the paladins of Prixis. All right, so the paladins of Prixis are the erudites of Otis. And they came and traveled to Antonica and stopped the burning dead that were under the leadership of Marnarch Jarl in this ancient time. Since his loss, Gnomish necromancers had continually sought a way to recapture or recreate his power, but Menenzia hoped to do more than just that. She planned to bring back Jarl himself.